Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging these fine conventions.
SoonerCon. Central Oklahoma's longest-running pop culture convention is back. SoonerCon 31 is scheduled for June 30th through July 2nd, 2023, in Norman, Oklahoma. It promises a weekend full of tabletop gaming, cosplay, and appreciation for literary sci-fi as well as TV and comics. Visit SoonerCon.com for more information. The Hellmouth Convention. The Hellmouth Convention is designed by fans for fans, with the aim of harnessing the power of fandom to raise money for charities. The Hellmouth Convention celebrates all fandoms, but particularly things like Buffy, Firefly, and Dr. Horrible. Like the Hellmouth itself, things gravitate toward it that you may not find anywhere else. The next event is scheduled for June 9th through 11th, 2023, in Los Angeles, California.
On tap today, we have David Giltinan. How you doing this fine day?
I'm doing all right, and I'll thank you also for pronouncing my last name correctly, because a lot of people don't tend to get that. So
you know what? My name is a butchered form of Polish, so I get a lot of mispronounced names too. I try really carefully to get people's names right. It's a thing.
I super appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. It's always like the European names that tend to kind of get like mangled.
So you came to my attention. I mean, I followed your stuff for a while, but you announced a Kickstarter book that I am really stoked about.
Mm-hmm.
It's a video game reference book on the Virtual Boy and the Game Boy.
Correct. Yes.
And then, I mean, I love these books are coming out. A lot of them are really, really well done. But what attracted me to yours was that these are some deeper cuts than we're used to.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, especially with the Virtual Boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there tends not to be a whole lot of love for the Virtual Boy, and it's kind of the opposite way for the Game Boy. Like everyone loves the Game Boy. Everyone and their grandmother literally had a Game Boy at the time. So, and obviously with like the Virtual Boy, I think its library was about like 22 games, like in total. So, it's really, really cool to having the coverage for both of those consoles, really. So, yeah.
I'm going to confess my bias right now. I do not love the Virtual Boy in an ironic sense. I love it wholeheartedly. I had one when it was brand new. I paid full price. I was that dude. So, I mean, I get why the rest of the world didn't like it, but I love that system and I will defend it to the death.
Awesome. Well, I guess if I can turn the tables on you a little bit, what is it about the Virtual Boy, I guess, that made you most excited when it first came out?
Well, it was an extension of a style of game I was already very fond of. I loved Nintendo style. I loved a lot of the ideas they were coming up with. And this was a time when 3D gaming was a very new thing. And there was no blueprint to how it was going to get done. We eventually came up with this polygonal textured model where you made these 3D worlds, and that, what the PlayStation and the N64 did. But there was no reason that had to be the way things went. The stereoscopic 2D visions, I think, could have been just as good, and I liked the way it played out.
Totally, yeah. I mean, and obviously, like being kind of like the precursor in a way of like what we're seeing now with like with like Oculus and HTC Vive and PSVR and all that stuff. It's kind of like a precursor to all that. Now, obviously, it wasn't like putting you necessarily like in a 3D world, at least not for the most part. Probably the closest thing to that was the Telero Boxer game,
Mm-hmm.
But even then, it's not like you're actually like moving around in a 3D space in that case. So it might have been like kind of like one of those things that was like ahead of its time, and maybe something that Nintendo maybe hoped to kind of build off of, like almost like a prototype of sorts. But I guess because of the reaction to it and how how it did in the marketplace when it released, and I guess like Nintendo's unwillingness really to kind of go even further with it. Proved to be like its death knell, unfortunately. Otherwise, the concept behind it was definitely really, really, really cool.
The concept was great. I think the potential was definitely there, especially because, like I said, the other forms of 3D took off so quickly after that. I can imagine if you had a racing game or a first-person shooter, the genres that worked in 3D well, we never really got to try on the Virtual Boy. And I'm not saying that would have changed the story, but it would have been an experiment worth running.
Yeah, and I think it was like an uphill battle regardless, just because of just the visual style of it anyway, and having like just black red sort of display for every single game right there in your eyes, and I guess also too, like just like the setup, because like I had like the stand and you had to put like basically like, if you have like a table right here, you put it like right there at the table and you're like leading in, so it's, I don't know, it felt like it was, it just had like a lot of caveats behind it. I think just didn't really fit into like a lot of people's gaming style, I suppose. Yeah.
That was, I think, the biggest problem. People said that the headaches and this and that. The bottom line was it wasn't a portable, it wasn't a set-top console. It was this weird thing that wasn't either, and that's never worked. The closest we came was like the Vectrix, and that didn't do well in its own day either.
True. Yeah, and that's a good comparison, actually.
Yeah, I'm not the first person to say it, so I'm not going to take any credit for that. But yeah, and I loved the Virtual Boy, but I'm also a big fan of the Game Boy. And the Game Boy, like you said, everybody loved it, but Nintendo doesn't seem to acknowledge it very much.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like in terms of like their retro consoles, certainly. I mean, they certainly focus more on, let's say, like the NES or the SNES, especially. The N64, they're starting to kind of like show it some love with its addition to the Nintendo Switch Online service as well. So they definitely focus more on those other consoles. I guess out of all the portable consoles throughout their history, they probably show the most love to the Game Boy Advance, at least from what I've gathered. But it is kind of interesting though, just because like the Game Boy was that first like truly big success after the NES, obviously. But the first truly, like I guess like portable success after the Game & Watch series.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's the system I remember they have a lot of Game Boy games on the 3DS when the 3DS had its own eShop. They haven't opted to put those on the Switch in any way, shape, or form. And
for some strange reason.
Yeah, people are begging for those games, literally, and they're hacking their systems because they can't get them any other way. I still carry around my Game Boy Advance because it's my go-to. I'm going to get an analog pocket when the time comes. I don't understand why Nintendo doesn't put more emphasis on the nostalgia for it.
It's almost like Nintendo hates money.
I think so sometimes.
I mean, I've made the argument, and this kind of ties into it really, that Nintendo should really just carve out a part of their business to be devoted to retro consoles, to like their retro line of like games and consoles and all that stuff, and make like retro merchandise, like all that stuff, like pixel art, Mario pillows, or whatever. Just like have like a dedicated part of your business be just all retro gaming stuff. And that would just make a killing. I mean, you saw like what happened when the NES Classic came out, when the SNES Classic came out. They had limited supplies of those, and they had to make like new new iterations of them, or new like waves of them, in order to keep up with the demand. And yeah, I mean, it just blows my mind that Nintendo just doesn't go like full bore into that as far as like a part of their company. And obviously still like do like your newer stuff with the Nintendo Switch and all, but I mean, to not like really lean in, considering how much nostalgia people have for old Nintendo stuff, it just boggles me. Yeah.
I think they're starting to do that in an unofficial capacity, because looking at the internal stuff that they're circulating around and some of the higher end products they release for collectors, they're leaning on those nostalgia notes a lot more than they did about 10 years ago.
I mean, I guess like on like an unofficial basis, since they're starting to open up more to third parties as far as like working with them for that stuff. I guess like more on an official basis, because Nintendo tends to be more like control freaks as far as like other game companies are concerned. So I figure like on like a first person standpoint or first party standpoint, that they would I guess like want to do more than just have retro games tied to their subscription model, which Nintendo tends to be like a little bit behind the curve anyway when it comes to anything online. So we'll see like how far that goes and if they'll do anything more, but I'm not really banking on it, like aside from the subscription model. Yeah.
But that's where you come in. You're supplying something that they don't seem too eager to supply themselves. Can you describe exactly how much information you're packing into this new book?
Sure. I mean, basically, it is going to be covering the like all the games basically from from the Game Boy and from the Virtual Boy. I believe it's so definitely over 1,000 titles in total. I think it's like 1,078, I believe, is the official number. But yeah, it's basically going to be doing coverage for all those games. There's going to be reviews for games as well, which I'll be writing for that. And for the most part, I'll be basically taking what's like the original French, since the company Geeks Line Publishing is a French company, and I've worked with them before for their NES book, which a lot of people seem to really enjoy, especially since like previous Geeks Line games, they had like some issues as far as like sentence structure and just good English effectively. So that's why I was contacted by like the lead over at Geeks Line, and he was very happy with how the NES book came out. Reached out to me later on, wanted to work on a Game Boy book, and then he attached a Virtual Boy to that as well. And I believe there was supposed to be multiple editions for that, like where it was kind of like separated, but he figured it made more sense just to have the one ultimate edition effectively of Game Boy and Virtual Boy. So it'll be basically doing coverage of, yes, the games, but also like the consoles and how they were made and like the thinking behind them. Especially at the time, and like a lot of like nitty gritty into like the technology of behind each console as well. So yeah.
So you're writing these reviews entirely yourself, or you're translating some from the original French?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So most of the book will be basically me retranslating or improving upon the English from the original translation from the original French, effectively. So but otherwise, like there will be exclusive reviews in there, which I'll be reviewing Game Boy games, and I'm not sure if Virtual Boy games will be included with those reviews, but I know at the very least, like one really cool thing with the Virtual Boy aspect is that the book sets will come with 3D glasses, effectively, like the old school 3D glasses, and there will be screenshots of Virtual Boy games that will be affected by that. So you can so you can actually like enjoy what the Virtual Boy brought without having to own a Virtual Boy yourself.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely a concern, because the biggest problem with the Virtual Boy these days is just getting the hardware to work correctly.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the case for a lot of old hardware, but yeah, especially so for the Virtual Boy.
Yeah. So were you approached to do this project? Did you jump in with both feet?
Yeah, because like I said, I've worked with the company before for their NES book, and they were very happy with how that turned out. A lot of people who bought that book were also very happy with how it was. Like, I made sure to kind of pay attention to the feedback, especially compared to the previous book, since I had their N64 book and their SNES book before coming on board for this project, and it really was just kind of like a happenstance thing. Like I think Gene, who's like the lead over there at Geeks Line, he reached out to me on Facebook back when I was still on Facebook, and just like a random DM basically, and be like, hey, like I like your writing, I've seen your stuff before. Would you like to come on board for this NES book? And I was like, sure. And that was like 550 pages of just like a few months basically kind of going through all that. So it was a lot of work, but it was definitely very satisfying work, and I was really happy with the end result of it. And and so basically, like a number of years later, that's when he reached out to me again, be like, hey, we're planning to do a Game Boy book, and then adding Virtual Boy, and just kind of going over details slowly over time. And now we'll actually start putting our noses to the ground and working on the book starting beginning of August. So yeah, very soon.
I brought this up in another episode a while back now, that one of the things that I love about the Game Boy, and the Game Boy is like actually the only retro console I actively collect for these days. I was originally an NES guy, and I was going to get every game, and that just became a non-priority. But I still buy a lot of Game Boy games.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think of is that back then, people would look at Game Boy people as weird, because we were running around and we had our Game Boy and we were playing it, and we were in our own little world with the rest of the world around us. And they thought we were weird. And now everybody's going around with one of these things here.
Right.
The Game Boy people were way ahead of that curve.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like, it is funny how times change like that, and expectations change. And I mean, like, it just goes to show, as far as like, technology in general, like how much it shapes society and cultures, and, people's habits and all that stuff. Because yeah, I mean, everyone has one of these now. Everyone has iPads. Everyone has, or not, not everyone, but like more and more people are getting like virtual reality too. And I've been actually seeing more video or pictures of people taking of like people on like trains, for example, or like public transportation in general, with virtual reality headsets on. And it's just like, wow, like, that's like taking it to like a next level now at this point. So yeah, I'll like reserve judgment on it, but like, it is interesting to notice. Yeah.
Yeah. Like back nowadays, if you ask somebody to look at, if you look at their phone, they're like, wait, what are you going to be looking at in there? Because that is such a personal thing. And the Game Boy people were looked at as being just these weird little recluses. And, and I'm looking at this now. I should probably point out that my phone actually has a Virtual Boy case on it because
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just noticed that. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, no, it's just very interesting to see again, like how technology shapes human behavior, I guess, in that sense. And we're only seeing it more and more these days as we're like basically we're all becoming reclusives together in a sense.
And that's one of the reasons that you making these kinds of books and anybody who's worked on these kinds of projects really needs a pat on the back, because we're trying to find the common threads that connect us when maybe social pressures are pushing us far apart into our little devices. We're remembering that there is a social reason we're doing these things, and we do get something out of it.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it can, because I could certainly say, at least in terms of this book and Geeks Line books in general, because this isn't going to be like too different, I guess. Like if you're familiar at all with Geeks Line's books, like in general, like they're very exhaustive looks, like historical texts, really looking back on whatever console that particular book happens to be covering. So you're going to know everything as far as like, what went into making the Game Boy and the Virtual Boy, all the ins and outs, documents, like all that stuff. Basically, it's very, very exhaustive as far as like Geeks Line's books are concerned. So if you're interested in, just like retro gaming history, Geeks Line really does provide like some of the best resources for that. And that's one of the reasons why I originally came on board for the NES book back then, and why I was excited to jump on board for this Game Boy and Virtual Boy sets. So, it's just really, really cool work, and they're really awesome people to work with as well. So, I think anyone who's like really interested in the consoles that are covered by their books, I would implore you to check out Geeks Line Publishing for more of their stuff, because it is really some of the best books in terms of game history and like the most exhaustive look into these games and their consoles.
So let's say to try to boost this a little bit here. We're having a conversation with somebody who remembers the NES, they remember the Game Boy. They haven't really paid attention for the past 30 years though. That part of their life is in the past. You have this comprehensive look at the history. What's a fact that they might read in this book that might jog their memory and say, oh, wow, that's affected my life in a way I don't know about, and maybe I should read about this more?
Sure. I mean, certainly in regards to the Game Boy, because I don't have like the text in front of me, and I should be getting the text very, very soon though from Geeks Line to work on. But in terms of what I know that is on there, if you have any sort of like interest in just like the mechanical side of the consoles and like what makes them run, and like how like Nintendo basically approached like making these consoles, especially in regards to like the Virtual Boy, like if you know anything about the Virtual Boy, or even if you don't, and you're just like, oh, like Nintendo made this weird, like kind of, virtual reality-esque, but not really, and it's all in red. And it's like, what was even the thinking behind that? Again, this will go into exhaustive detail over all that. So, and in regards to like the Game Boy, it'll certainly go into exhaustive detail as far as like, how it basically progressed from the Game & Watch effectively to the Game Boy. And, as far as like making the Game Boy kind of like a cheaper alternative to handheld gaming, I'd say probably like the only other cheaper alternative really than the Game Boy were like the Tiger Electronic toys. And that came out like afterwards, and they had like their own success, obviously, but the Game Boy had that kind of like sweet spot really of being affordable and still having quality gaming attached to it. So I would say that, and also, looking back on like, again, how impactful the Game Boy was, which goes back to your point of like why Nintendo doesn't show the original Game Boy as much love in terms of like their retro consoles and all that. Because it did have like such an impact on the industry, and it was one of those things like not seen since like the Wii. I'd say that non-gamers embraced a gaming console like the Game Boy. I mean, there's that famous picture that like a lot of people might know of Hillary Clinton on a plane playing Tetris on the Game Boy. It's like Hillary Clinton of all people playing Tetris on Game Boy. So, I mean, like it just goes to show like, again, how impactful it was on society.
I remember just after the Game Boy came out, but before I could get my hands on one, it was there was maybe a 5-month space in there. I was on a plane, and there was a gentleman next to me who had a Game Boy and like 2 of the launch titles. I think it was like Mario, baseball, or it was Tetris, baseball, and tennis. And I just loved being able to swap between the two. And I remember feeling this was something so advanced. And I think a lot of us kind of had that idea that it was a very advanced piece of technology. And only in retrospect do we realize it wasn't, not even at the time.
Mhm.
It was just technology that was able, you could buy it cheap and in bulk.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like that whole idea of being able to kind of swap out games, like it wasn't invented by the Game Boy, but it certainly took the idea and like really, really ran with it again in a very affordable package. So yeah, that was kind of the big thing, because I think for a lot of people, since that whole idea of being able to have like a device that you can swap out games for, was kind of new enough to them that a lot of people treated it like a Tetris machine, almost like you have like a Pong machine, like from, back in the 70s or whatever. Like a lot of people kind of treated it that way, but then they realized it's like, oh, there's Super Mario Land, or there's like whatever that breakout game was, like with Mario
Alleyway. Yeah.
Alleyway, that's right. Yeah. I mean, like you had all sorts of like, games like that, which really bolstered the library, and certainly much later on, say with games like Link's Awakening, really defined what the Game Boy was for a lot of people. And it showed like the lasting power of that console too, because like it lasted for so long and stayed relevant for so long too, longer than I would say most consoles do in general. So it's really cool to see like just the progression of it. And again, this book will just go into exhaustive detail as far as like how that all came about, and Nintendo's thinking behind it.
Yeah, you could really get a feel for, if you look at early titles versus later titles, there was definitely a progression of thought behind what a Game Boy game was. The very first 3 or 4 years of titles, they were intentionally very quick experiences. They were, even the platformers that could have had multiple worlds. Mario Land is 4 worlds. It's like half of Super Mario Brothers. And the Ninja Turtle game was short. The games that you could have had very long experiences on the NES, they deliberately cut in half. And then toward the end of it, they have RPGs, they have simulation games. It's like we're getting the idea that people will just suck themselves into this for hours at a time, and they want that experience.
Totally. Yeah. You're definitely hitting it right on the head. I mean, it's just, like obviously there were like technology restraints as far as having games be that short, but that was okay as well, because like, it's just having like something on the go. And again, considering the fact that the Game Boy did allow you to swap games, you could bring like I remember my neighbor had is like where I kind of got like a lot of my original Game Boy experience from, because like he had one, he had all the accessories for it, and he had his little Game Boy suitcase that was shaped like a giant Game Boy. I'm sure like a lot of people who are Game Boy aficionados know what I'm talking about. That is basically like a little Game Boy suitcase for all your games and accessories and all that stuff. So he made sure to have all that, because he had like the big like screen, like the magnifying glass thing that he had in front, and like little speakers that fold out. It was a wild time.
Like, accessories were a big deal with the Game Boy.
Accessories, yeah. Nintendo loves their accessories in general, as like a lot of people know throughout their history. But yeah, the Game Boy I feel like is where like that first exploded, really, So it was really, really cool. And then again, like just the progression of games. I mean, going from Tetris to something like Link's Awakening, which is certainly a lot more complex of a game. It really did kind of bring like almost like a Link to the Past like experience, but on the go. And that was like a huge deal for a lot of people. And it also just so happened to be one of the best Legend of Zelda games of all time, too.
It did. It very much did.
Yeah.
That was the game that actually made me buy my Switch, because I loved that game so much that the second I said they're remaking it, I need that system. And for some reason, I'd avoided getting a Switch until then, and that changed my mind overnight.
Everyone always has like their killer app for whatever for every console. For me, it was the Mario and Rabbids game on Switch, because I'm because I'm a big like tactics fan and XCOM fan, and I was just like, oh, it's Mario XCOM, but like it's got that Nintendo flair to it or whatever. So, but yeah, like the Link's Awakening remake was absolutely incredible. I remember I got to play like an early version of that in PAX West when it was being first shown, and it was just like, yeah, definitely keeping this on my radar. This is like looking really good. So yeah.
So does book gets into the original Game Boy? Does it touch the Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance at all?
A little bit, yeah. As far as I know, again, I don't have, I haven't had the text in front of me, so I can't like, confirm absolutely. But I believe there is going to be some talk on like the Game Boy variants that came after the original. Although this will be absolutely dedicated to the OG Game Boy and what again, what went behind it, the technology, all that stuff.
I think that's fair because people will follow the Game Boy through the Color and the Advanced line, and those are very worthy systems in their own right.
Hmm.
But there seems to be a certain that original aesthetic, that original model was so influential that everything else feels like I don't want to say a lesser sequel, but
Hmm.
I mean, you can definitely see that what came first really made the most impact.
I mean, the original Game Boy obviously is so steeped in pop culture. I mean, you would see it in anything even outside of gaming, like in movies, TV shows, whatnot, like anything that kind of shows like, that time basically of like gaming. And for sure, you're going to see a Game Boy. I mean, I remember looking back on old childhood photos and sure enough, there's like a kid in my group of friends and like someone has a Game Boy and while we're all just like trying to take pictures and stuff. So it just showed how much it was attached to pop culture and its staying power really in that era. Yeah.
At the You mentioned the Game Boy had this incredible lifespan. It was released in 89, if I remember correctly, late 80,
Yes.
89. And it
Hmm.
was around the Game Boy Color was finally released in 98. So that's about a decade.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
the Game Boy Color was replaced by the Game Boy Advance in like 2001, 2001. So that's like,
So I remember it's early 2000s.
yeah,
Yeah.
10 years and then a 4-year stint. And then this is the Wii U lasted longer than that. Okay. I mean, I have no disrespect for the Game Boy Color, but in Game Boy history, it is this weird middle child. And then the Game Boy Advance gets this reputation for being only ports, which it kind of was, but there was some darn good original games for that system too.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. And I'll also be like full disclosure, I owned a Game Boy Color myself. I
Mhm.
never owned the original Game Boy. Again, like a lot of my original Game Boy experience came from my neighbor, and I went over to his house all the time and would play his Game Boy games, including that awful Spider-Man game. If anyone remembers Spider-Man on the original Game Boy, that was rough. But yeah, we have like a lot of like fun memories with that one. Yeah, in terms of like the Game Boy Color, I mean, I did love it. I mean, like I had the Super Mario, was it Super Mario Brothers Deluxe, I believe it was
Yeah.
called,
Mhm.
and it had actually like a built-in calendar in that game, and I actually used that calendar because remember this is like before iPhones and all that stuff, and then you sort of like
Mhm.
any sort of like PDA system or whatever, And yeah, like I used it to actually like manage my schedule as a kid. Basically, it's like go play at this kid's house like a Mario, you know. And the Tetris DX was also really cool. Was also really cool too. So I mean, like it was really good, but like it just kind of felt like a slight upgrade from what people were already enjoying, and people just held on to their original Game Boys because those things are built like tanks. They don't make
Mhm.
game consoles like that anymore.
No.
It's just like a big brick. Like you can use it as a weapon if someone breaks into your house or something. And I'll also mention real quick too. If you go to the Nintendo store over in New York, they have a Game Boy that survived the Gulf War. Like it was some soldier's Game Boy, and their base was like got like bombed or something. It got like attacked, so it's all like kind of charred up, but it still works and
Mhm.
like it's on display at the Nintendo New York store with Tetris still playing on it and everything like on loop. So it's just really cool, like again how they made that, and again you'll learn all that in this book. So
We talked earlier about the accessories. The one I was familiar with and what seemed like everybody had was the Newbie case. And
Mm.
Newbie was the company that made it. It was a case that could hold one system and 4 games in their case, and it was this hard plastic. And it was like this really, really ruggedized plastic. It was like the ancestor of the Pelican case we have now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the irony was that the system was probably more durable than the case, even with that. I mean, the case could take a bullet, and the system would still probably outlive it anyway.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's almost like the reverse of like a bulletproof vest or something, like this won't work, but you'll still be fine. So, yeah, like the newbie accessories. Yeah, I do remember that. And, basically everything that they made for it. Cause I remember there was like the newbie, little kind of light as well. Cause obviously with the Game Boy, for anyone who grew up with the Game Boy, you'll know if you were in road trips in the back seat and you're going through you're driving at night or whatever, it's almost impossible to play the game unless you have some sort of light source. And there's like that there's kind of like a funny meme like where like only like only like 90s kids know if you're playing a Game Boy in the back seat and the only light source you're getting are from like the street lights, like as you're going through and everything. Like the struggle was real back then. So but yeah, like all those accessories will actually be very very exhaustively looked over in this book as well, which is really cool. Like there's like no stone unturned effectively when it comes to the Game Boy and the Virtual Boy with this set. So yeah, you're going to hear all about Newbie. You're going to hear all about all those like Game Boy accessories and anything that came out for the Virtual Boy as well. Which albeit very small, but like it's it's still really cool, and it'll be the most exhaustive guide you'll have for that.
The accessories are really valuable there because like there's a lot of information on the games out there. It's scattered throughout the web, but if you Google enough, you will find it. But I've had a lot of trouble finding information on some of the accessories. Like I just pick one example, the Work Boy, which didn't come out. So it's fair that we didn't actually get a whole lot of information, but it was teased quite a bit.
Yeah. I believe the Work Boy will be included in this because there will be stuff in the book that, will cover stuff that hasn't been like actually like released in the public. Again, it's going to be very exhaustive. So it's going to be, it will be covering everything that has come out and hasn't, and even like cancel games too. Like they'll be covered in this book too. So yeah, it's going to be really, really cool. Like when people get this in their hands and they're just going to be like, yeah, like everything that I know about and even don't know about, because I can guarantee you there will be something new that you'll learn about in this book, even if you are like the biggest like Game Boy historian, Game Boy aficionado, or the Virtual Boy as well. There will be at least one nugget of information that'd be like, I didn't know that. So yeah.
Well, as soon as I've heard about this, I went back to Kickstarter. Where can other people do this? Because there should still be time to back this Kickstarter when this episode hits the web.
Totally, yeah. In fact, I will double check right now. Let me just pull up the Kickstarter right now and see where we're at. So yeah, we have 21 days to go as of this recording, and we had a goal of like just over 40,000. We're currently over 63,000. So yeah, like you definitely have. Again, as of this recording, we have 3 weeks to go. And, yeah, if you could back it, that'd be great. If you could share it, also great. And yeah, just like let everyone who you think would appreciate, basically an exhaustive historical look at the Game Boy and the Virtual Boy. Know about this project because yeah, there's going to be something here for everyone who appreciates these consoles.
I'm going to make sure all that information goes in the show notes on my website, aaronboswick.com. David, where can people follow your personal adventures and any other projects you might be working on?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at the Guilty Man. So it's DAGILTYMAN. And you can also find my voiceover website, since I do voiceover as well, among the several other things I do, at davidsaysthat.com. So you can basically find all my reels and all my basically voiceover work on there. But otherwise, as far as I kind of keeping the most up-to-date tabs, I'd say like, Twitter is the best way to go, and Instagram is where you'll find photo and video adventures. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for doing this. I would love to have you back anytime, and I can't wait to read the book and maybe share some insights with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I super appreciate it, Aaron, and thanks for having me on.
Likewise. Take good care.